Hi folks, please just click the like and subscribe button. This will help make the content more and better for you. I was always broke and had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I've always had a love for animals, so when this couple contacted me to ask a house sit for them for the last few days before they returned from their overseas trip, as the last sitter had bailed on them, their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone. I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me the full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it even more appealing. Little did I know how bad it would turn out. I got the details, got the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house. As it was already after 5 p.m. and almost dark, being early spring, I got to the house, which was a really nice place, but it bordered on not such a good area that was and still is prone to crime, house break-ins, robberies, etc. It didn't bother me much because, nothing will happen to me. I was young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch, watching movies, jacuzzi, and just generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I went over to check on the doggo. I got a call from them at about 10 p.m. saying their flight got delayed. They're going to stay in a hotel and do the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning, and asked if I could sleep there again that night, which was fine. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in my car. I called my dad to let him know of my plans as I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. I normally didn't give them details like that because I was old enough to look after myself, I thought. I still believe to this day that that probably saved my life. I eventually got to bed at 1 a.m., and it felt like I'd only slept 5 minutes when I was awoken to a window breaking, and I could hear movement and what sounded like footsteps running down the hall. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as pressing one button as my dad was the last number that I had called, hoping that he wakes up from the call. I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and mattress in case my dad picks up that he can hear what is going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette, and he had a knife in his hand. When he saw me, he raised it and came at me. Number one thing to those that are unfamiliar with South Africa. In the crime, robberies, and house invasions usually are very brutal and violent. People get murdered or tortured if they in the slightest retaliate or don't cooperate with the robbers. Out of instinct, I raised my legs back when he came at me, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I can. No, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'3", and at that stage, I weighed about 100 kilograms or 220 pounds, and I was fit and strong. My time not spent at the university or work was at the gym. I could do an easy 250-pound bench, 350-pound squat. When I kicked and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife shot out of his hand as well. Before he got the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my right knee into his face, and in return, his head into the wall. I knew that my life depended on it, so I put in some extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, but before I could get up, I heard the sound of the pistol, and I froze. It felt like all the blood drained from my body, and I became just numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, I would rather die than be disabled or dependent on other people that will have to take care of me. He stood like that with a pistol against my head for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 10 seconds. I didn't move, and he eventually said in very broken English to get on the bed face down. I panicked but thought that if he wanted to shoot me, that he already would have done so, so I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into a fetal position with my back against the wall, just so that if they wanted to stab me, that I'd have my legs and arms in front to protect my body. By that time, I had forgotten that I had called my dad, and the guy that I need is still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I couldn't understand what they said, but I recognized it as we used to go to Mozambique on holiday a lot, and that is the main language spoken there. The one guy tried to get the guy that I put down off the ground while the others started to ransack the house, shoving valuables into a huge bag. It was about this time that I heard tires screeching and a car approaching at what sounded like Mach 1. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and I heard someone scream. It was my dad. The three inside the house panicked and ran out of the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now, I know my dad missed them on purpose because if he wanted to hit them, he would, as he's not just one of but the best shots that I know. And I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. He is ex-Special Forces, represented in South Africa in the Clay Pigeon World Championships a couple of years ago, has various regional pistol and rifle championship titles, and is a gunsmith by occupation. I have seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with his pistol. I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote, and my dad called the police while he came in. I met him at the front door, and we walked out to the car to wait there for the police. It took them over an hour to get there, some excuse of no vehicle available. By that time, I had calmed down and started to look for the dog. I couldn't find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard. And as I got to the corner, I could see her laying on the ground. I got to her and saw that she had passed away. Later autopsies revealed that she was poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is pretty standard practice in my country for dealing with dogs at a house or area that is targeted for a break-in or robbery. I was fuming and so sad. The police were also pretty useless and had a don't-care attitude, barely taking our statements. By that time, it was starting to get light, and I retrieved my bag, phone, and locked the house as good as I can without touching anything, and drove home behind my father. Only when I got home, I got the story from my dad's side. He said he answered my call only to hear the shouting and what sounded like fighting going on. And when I didn't respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. Luckily, he asked for the address the previous night, and he knew the area well enough to know exactly which house it was. Now my dad got there pretty quickly, and he said he stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he stopped at the gate. My parents' house is about 10 kilometers or 6 miles from there through a residential area. It normally took about 20 minutes of a drive, and the call duration was 7 minutes and 13 seconds. I met the detective there later that day, gave my statement. They took fingerprints, etc., and the owners got back about the same time. The rest of the day was a blur as I came down from the shock and adrenaline. Now, that is not where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys, and I must come to a lineup to point them out. I specifically told her that I didn't see any of their faces as it was dark, and after the guy held the gun against my head, I was under the blanket and didn't see anything. She assured me that they caught them on fingerprints and will show them to me beforehand, which might not be the ethically correct way to do it, but they wanted to have as much evidence as possible against them. You will understand why in a minute. I got to the police station, and unlike you see in the movies, there is no one-way glass or separation room. They'd bring the 3 guys into the room and make them stand against the wall. The one, which I was later told was the leader, which was the one that I had need, looked at me with so much hate as I had never seen in my life. He had the eyes of someone that would slit your throat and not blink an eye. His name was Joseph Dragon. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit my throat gesture. You know which one I mean. We left the room, and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet, amongst others. 4 counts of murder. I think 8 to 9 for attempted murder, multiple assaults, aggravated assault, over 100 cases of house break-ins, robbery, and indecent assault against women. I was shocked. The detective told me that had I not taken him out first and fast that night, I would have definitely not gotten away so lightly. Now, this is also not where the story ends. 3 days later, I get another call from the detective saying that I should be careful as he had escaped from custody, and they had not caught him yet. I was not worried too much as the robbery wasn't at my house, and I had changed cars, so he probably couldn't find me. Also, I got my firearm license and carried my pistol on me 24/7. I didn't hear anything after that until about 2 years later when I saw the detective at the grocery store. We started talking about the case, and she told me that he was killed during a home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was waiting for him, pissed. One hand shot him once in the stomach and once in the neck, and thanks to the slow response time of emergency services and police, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. Story 2. When I was 14, I met a guy named James. He was 17. I dated him for 5 years. I'm 30 now. I grew up very poor to a teenage mother. I never met my father till I was 20. I made some pretty bad choices as a young lady. James was a big-time dealer at the time. I found that thrilling and so cool. It was a typical abusive relationship. He cheated on me a lot and physically, mentally, and emotionally abused me. He would then buy me things or give me money to make it all better. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't know any better and had poor self-esteem. His money took me away from my poor home life, so I stayed for 5 years. This happened when I was 17. James and his brother Victor bought a house in a really nice neighborhood. Victor was a single guy, the player type. He had a random girl over visiting that night. James and I were going to bed. It was about midnight. Victor and his new girlfriend left the house and took James's vehicle. James and I were alone in the house. About 2 minutes after Victor left, we heard a knock at the door. James got up and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten his keys. I'll be right back." I'm in bed. I hear James say, "Oh, you have the wrong house, ma'am. Buzz off." He comes running into the room, telling me to close the door as we hear the door getting kicked down. 2 men entered the house. One was wearing a bandana over his face. The other guy I didn't recognize. He wasn't trying to hide his identity. They started kicking down the bedroom door as we did our best to hold our weight against it. We were screaming and begging them to leave. At one point, the bandana guy got his arm and leg through the door, and I made eye contact with him. He dropped this sawed-off shotgun. I reached for it, and he seemed to back off a little bit. The other guy grabbed the gun. Out of fear, I couldn't recognize him, but I felt something in the stare he gave me. We thought maybe they were after money or some sort of contraband. We had no weapons, and all of the illicit stuff was in a separate bedroom. They didn't take anything. It wasn't a robbery. They were there to give someone a beating. James was on the phone with the police the whole time this was happening. The guys took off. It was time to check what they took and hide all of our stuff. The police came, and they noticed a bullet hole in the wall in the bedroom directly beside the room we were in. I found out later it was because bandana guy hid the gun out of the other guy's hand as he tried to shoot me through the door. I went home the next day, completely traumatized, not wanting to tell my family anything that happened. They all gossiped. I walked in the door, and my grandmother knew about the home invasion. My family knew James was a dealer, and they weren't concerned. I thought at the time someone who James knew must have known someone in my family, since she said a female cousin told her. My cousin Anthony's wife called me saying Anthony wants to say sorry, but you weren't supposed to be there. Again, I was dumb and assumed someone in the thug world told them. We lived in a small city, and I was so naive, and was convinced it was a robbery from another rival dealer. And that wasn't the case at all. We spent weeks waiting for them to come back. James made sure he had always had a few scary guys with guns in the house. I realize now, but this only adds to my trauma. A few months after this happens, I am at James's house reading the newspaper. I see my cousin Anthony and another guy in the most wanted section. The other guy looked vaguely familiar. Anthony is gang-related. We're the same age and grew up extremely close, although he got locked up at age 13 and has been on and off ever since. Anthony and I would write to each other. We have a strong bond. The phone rings, and a girl named Carly that is completely in love with Victor. But since he's a player, he treats her like crap. She brings up the mug shots in the paper and says, "That's your cousin, right?" She confesses to me that the home invasion was because of her. The other guy in the mug shot liked her and told him how Victor would slap her around. My cousin Anthony was his friend. They made her tell them where Victor lived, and they watched the house until they had seen what they thought was me and James Lee. She was apologizing profusely, begging me not to tell James. I didn't. I knew if I told him, he would have had her shot. And also because it was my cousin, I assumed I would get some blame or have to show James's thugs where my cousin lived, regardless of what he did. I'm stupidly loyal to family. I saw Anthony had a family function a few years later. He said sorry, and then he loves me. And it wasn't his fault. That was 13 years ago. My life is completely different now. I consider myself an upstanding member of society, but I still feel a lump in my throat when I talk about it. I can't even go to a gun range without having an all-out panic attack. Story 3. Monterrey, Mexico. I was about 10 years old. If you don't know, Monterrey is actually a pretty crime-infested city. It's beautiful. You just got to know in what spots you are in. All throughout my childhood, I would visit and live in Mexico during the summer so I can be around my family that still lives there to this day. Although the summer of 2009 was the last summer my family would be going there for obvious reasons I'm about to present. So all of my family, for my mom's and dad's side, all live in the city called Monterrey in Mexico. I'm sure many of you probably don't know this place, but let's just say it's not the safest city, especially with the drug and crime situation in Mexico at the time. Me and my two brothers, however, never saw it this way, and instead thought more of our cousins and family. We lived in a 2-story house in the regular neighborhood. Nothing fancy or expensive, just normal, I guess. There had always been problems with corrupt police and robberies throughout the night, but I never expected to be a victim of it. One particular night, me and my two brothers, all between the ages of 8 and 12, were home alone with just my mom since my dad had gone out to go drinking with my uncles before the sun set. My mom was already a nervous wreck after supposedly seeing the same white Toyota pass by her house more than a couple of times. My mom took this very seriously due to the fact that her side of the family had fallen victim to a break-in similar to what was happening. However, she did not want to scare us, and just told us that today we had to be going to sleep earlier than usual. My father didn't own a phone and still doesn't, mostly because he's an old traditional type of guy, so my mom couldn't just call him to come home. I was confused as me and my brother Louis looked at each other with a disappointed reaction as we wanted to stay up later in the living room. and play Call of Duty, but my mom wasn't having it and demanded we go to our room early. My oldest brother Mario was soon catching up to the events and even looked a little worried. Now that I remember, we all slept in the same room that night, but we couldn't get any sleep. Midnight rolled around. Then me and my brothers were joking around when suddenly we heard a small creak coming from downstairs. The sound was usually made when the back door was open, since the house was mostly empty and pretty old. You could basically hear anything at a time like night when the house was quiet. Frozen, my brothers. And I stayed quiet. "Is that Dad?" Mario asked. But I knew this was not possible, since my dad always comes home around morning time, since he doesn't drink and drive. "What if it's those guys from afternoon?" Louis said in a jokingly voice, although I gotta admit my heart dropped at the sound of that. We all stayed quiet to try and hear any noise, when all of a sudden we could hear whispers coming from downstairs. We froze in shock, as we knew that this was not any of our family members. The more and more we listened, I could make up the voices about 2 or 3 people down there. I had never really felt adrenaline before in my life, but I could feel it with every pump my heart gave. I started thinking of the worst, of those kids that got kidnapped and never returned stories. Then, with a shocking decision, my oldest brother said that he would take a peek. "Are you crazy?" I said, wanting to shout, but obviously couldn't. "Chill out. It's probably just Mom with our uncles or something," he replied. "I fear about 20 seconds, which seemed like minutes at the time," he returned. To our horror, he returned pale and shaking so much I had to tell him to calm down. When he finally spoke, his voice was stuttering. He murmured the words, "Guys, there's someone down there." My stomach twisted with those words, and I could feel my heart pumping faster than ever before. We could react. I heard the most bone-chilling scream I had ever heard. The scream was so horrific. At first I didn't even recognize it was my mother's. In the span of seconds, my mom ran through the hallway into our room and locked the door. I could hear so many footsteps coming up the stairs in rapid movement. I was in shock as I realized what was happening. My brother Louis was crying frantically next to me. My mom threw us in the corner of the room farthest from the door and began trying to open the window. The men were pounding hard at the door, and what I mean hard, I honestly thought that in that moment we were all going to die or get kidnapped. I burst into tears as I saw my mom screaming out at the top of her lungs out the window, calling for help. Never had I heard the sound of despair coming from my mom's voice. From what little I could understand, the men were shouting in Spanish to shut up and things along the lines of "break the store down." I must have had a panic attack, because all I remember was waking up to the sounds of sirens coming from the end of the block. I could hear the men's footsteps running down the stairs and out the back door. Turns out our neighbor, the Blessed, had seen the group of thugs since the beginning and alerted the cops as soon as they heard them in our backyard. The police searched everywhere, even went on to the next 2 streets, but as we all know, they were long gone. For a long time after, I had nightmares and would have panic attacks when I would hear small voices at night. But as the years went on, so did my fear. My mom has never wanted to go back, and if we ever did, it would be in a hotel. She always says my dad tried to sell the property, but when my uncle went to go check the place out, it had already been broken in, and some stuff was missing. Nothing valuable, but just gives me more reason for never wanting to go back. Mexico can be a fun place, but please do be careful. Sometimes the police officers won't help, so in some situations, you're all alone. Story 4. All right, buckle up folks, 'cause I got a wild tale to tell you. So about a month back, I was chilling at home solo. Mom was off at her boyfriend's pad, and Sis was crashing at a friend's for a sleepover. Now, picture this. I'm a 17-year-old dude, just lounging in bed with my pooch, binge watching some forensic files on Netflix. Suddenly, my stomach starts growling, and I'm debating whether to get up and grub. So, I shoot a text to my buddy Elliot, asking for his 2 cents. He hits me back with a, "Yeah, go make some grub." So off I go to cook up some frozen chicken nuggets, my go-to comfort food. Now let me set the scene of my crib for you. My room's next to my mom's on the right, and my sister's room is on the left with a door leading to the living room. As I'm heading down the hallway, I notice something ain't right. The front door's wide open. Now I've got OCD, so I always make sure every door's shut and locked. But I figure Mom must have left it open on her way out. I shrug off the weird feeling and head to the kitchen to preheat the oven. But then, out of nowhere, I hear this loud thud, like someone's banging on a door. Panic mode kicks in, and I scoop up my dog, leash him up, and practically sprint out the door. I shoot a text to my boyfriend, asking him to swing by and pick me up, 'cause I'm convinced someone's lurking in the house, and I don't have wheels. He's down to rescue me, thank goodness. I call up Mom, and she tells me to stay put and dial 911. So I do just that. The operator tells me to hightail it to the neighbor's crib until the cops arrive. Fast forward, and I'm back home chatting with the cops when they haul up this sketchy-looking dude. Tall, wild hair, eyes bulging like he's seen a ghost. Turns out, the dude had been hiding in my sister's room with a knife, planning to rob us blind. He even threatens me as they drag him away. Talk about spine-chilling. I breathe a sigh of relief when my boyfriend finally rolls up the next day. The cops later fill me in that this creep had been casing our place, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If I hadn't followed my gut and bolted, who knows what could have gone down. Trust me, folks, always listen to your instincts. Story 5. It was a cold and rainy night, the kind that made you appreciate the warmth and coziness of your own home. My girlfriend Sarah had gone to stay with her mother for a few days. She wasn't feeling well, and I had insisted that she needed the comfort of her childhood home. I was home alone, and the emptiness of the house felt eerie, even with the soft hum of the TV in the background. I had just settled down on the couch with a ball of microwave popcorn when I heard a loud, urgent knocking on the front door. Startled, I paused the TV and looked at the clock. It was already 10:30 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? I cautiously made my way to the front door, my heart pounding with unease. Peering through the peephole, I saw a man standing on my doorstep. He was dressed in plain clothes and had a badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. He looked official, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I cautiously opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain lock securely fastened. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice filled with suspicion. The man gave me a practiced smile and spoke with a sense of urgency. "Sir, I'm an undercover police officer, and we've had reports of a break-in nearby. I need to ask you a few questions. Is it all right if I come in?" Alarm bells went off in my head. I'd always been taught to be cautious about letting strangers into my home, especially late at night. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you in," I replied firmly. "If you have questions, we can talk right here." The man's smile faded, and he became more insistent. "It's really important, and time is of the essence. I promise I won't take long." I hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to be helpful and the feeling that something wasn't right. Then I made a quick decision. "Hold on. Let me call the police station to verify your identity." I closed the door and quickly dialed the non-emergency number for our local police station. As I waited for someone to pick up, anxiety gnawed at me. The man on my doorstep was still there, no doubt wondering what was taking me so long. A voice answered on the other end, and I explained the situation. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be sent over to verify the man's identity. Feeling somewhat relieved, I returned to the door and told the man that I had called the police station to confirm his status. He seemed unnerved by this and took a step back. I kept the chain lock secured and waited for the officer to arrive. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, the tension in the air growing thicker. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. The man on my doorstep must have seen it too, because he turned and hurried away, disappearing into the darkness. The uniformed police officer arrived, and I explained the entire situation to him. He nodded and told me I had made the right call. He confirmed that there had been no reports of any break-ins in the area, and assured me that I had handled the situation correctly. Relieved but still shaken, I thanked the officer and watched as he drove away. I locked and bolted the door, double-checked all the windows, and even called Sarah to let her know what had happened. She urged me to stay vigilant and cautious. The rest of the night was restless. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. What if I had let that man into my home? What had he really wanted? The unanswered questions haunted me as I tried to get some sleep. The next morning, Sarah returned home. I recounted the strange encounter to her, and she shared my unease. We decided to inform the police about the incident just in case. They took our statements and promised to investigate. Weeks passed, and the incident slowly faded from our minds. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, and the emptiness of the house felt less eerie with Sarah by my side. Then one evening, I received a call from the police. They had identified the man who had come to my door that night. He wasn't a police officer at all. He had a history of posing as one to gain access to people's homes. The police had apprehended him, and he was now in custody. The news sent a chill down my spine. I had narrowly escaped a potentially dangerous situation. It was a chilling encounter that served as a stark reminder to always trust my instincts and prioritize my safety, especially when home alone. That night, as Sarah and I locked up the house and settled into bed, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of gratitude for her presence and the safety we found in each other's arms. The nightmare had passed, but the lessons it had taught us would remain forever etched in our minds. Story 6. It was a typical Friday night, and I found myself home alone. I decided to treat myself to a cozy evening. The rain was tapping lightly against the windows as I curled up on the couch with a good book. Around 8:30 p.m., the sound of thunder echoed through the house, and I realized I was getting hungry. Pizza sounded like the perfect comfort food for a rainy night, so I cracked my phone and dialed the local pizzeria. After a brief conversation with the friendly dispatcher, I placed my order and settled back into my book. The estimated delivery time was about 45 minutes, which gave me plenty of time to lose myself in the pages. As the minutes passed, I began to hear the faint rumble of an approaching motorcycle. I figured it was just a neighbor, not giving it much thought. When the doorbell rang, I jumped up, slightly startled by the sudden noise. I opened the door to find the pizza delivery guy, a young man with a cap and a pizza box in hand. He greeted me with a warm smile and handed me the pizza, making small talk as I paid. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I thanked him and closed the door, eagerly digging into my delicious pizza. As I savored each bite and continued to read my book, I lost track of time. It must have been an hour or so later when I heard the same motorcycle approaching once again. I frowned, thinking it was unusual for a delivery guy to return. But curiosity got the best of me, and I went to the window to see what was happening. To my shock, it was the same pizza delivery guy, parked his motorcycle and walked up to my doorstep with another pizza box in hand. This time, his friendly smile had morphed into a strange grin. My heart began to race as I opened the door. "Did you order another pizza?" he asked. his tone oddly cheerful. And no, I stammered, my voice shaky. I only ordered one. He handed me the second box, still grinning, and insisted it was paid for. I was too nervous to argue, so I took it. But as soon as I closed the door, a sinking feeling overtook me. Something was seriously wrong. I called the pizzeria immediately, wanting to confirm whether they had sent a second pizza or if this was some bizarre prank. The dispatcher on the other end sounded confused and assured me that they hadn't received any new orders from my address. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the unsettling truth. I was alone in my house with a strange man who had somehow duplicated the pizza delivery and showed up at my door a second time. Terrified, I decided to call the police, explaining the bizarre situation. They promised to send an officer right away, instructing me to lock all the doors and windows and stay on the line with them. Anxiously, I waited, glancing out the window and seeing the pizza guy still standing there, now staring intently at my front door. It felt like an eternity before the police finally arrived. They confronted the man outside, and I could hear a heated exchange of words through the closed door. Eventually, they handcuffed him and took him away in their squad car. An officer came inside to take my statement, assuring me that they would investigate further. I learned that this guy had a history of stalking behavior and had been fired from the pizzeria months ago. The relief that washed over me was immense, but the lingering fear of what could have happened that night haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched and followed, and I installed security cameras around my home. In the end, it turned out to be a disturbing and chilling encounter with a man who had sinister intentions. I shudder to think about what might have occurred if I hadn't been cautious and called the police. The memory of that rainy night still sends shivers down my spine, a constant reminder that danger can sometimes lurk behind the most ordinary circumstances. Story 7. It was a chilly, moonless night, and I found myself alone at home. My husband was away on a business trip, and the solitude felt eerie in the silence of our suburban house. I had just settled into bed, wrapping myself in the warmth of the blankets, when my phone rang, its shrill tone shattering the stillness. I glanced at the clock. It read 2 a.m. Who could be calling at this ungodly hour? I thought. Reluctantly, I picked up the phone, feeling a sense of unease creep over me. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling. The voice on the other end was low and familiar, sending shivers down my spine. "Did you miss me, darling?" the voice said. My heart leaked into my throat. I knew that voice all too well. It was my ex-boyfriend, Mark. We had parted ways under unpleasant circumstances, and I had hoped never to hear from him again. "How did you get this number?" I demanded, my voice quivering. Mark chuckled, a sinister sound that seemed to ooze through the phone. "I have my ways, sweetheart. I've been watching you, you know." My blood ran cold as his words sank in. The eerie idea that Mark could be watching me filled me with dread. I glanced around the dimly lit room, paranoia consuming me. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice quaking with fear. He went on recounting personal details about my day, mentioning places I had been and things I had done. Panic surged through me, and I realized that he had been spying on me, tracking my every move. Terror began to consume me as Mark continued his unsettling monologue. He spoke about our past, our relationship, and how he believed we were destined to be together. He professed his love, but it was tainted with an eerie obsession. "I'm coming for you, my love," he declared before hanging up. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my mind racing as I contemplated the meaning behind his ominous words. Was he really on his way to my house? I quickly dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. The police promised to send an officer to check on me, but the minutes dragged on. Unlike ours, As I bowled in agonizing fear, every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the windows sent me into a state of heightened paranoia. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I rushed to the door and flung it open, relieved to see the uniformed police officer standing there. He assured me that they would patrol the area and offered to stay nearby until morning for my safety. I agreed, grateful for the presence of someone to protect me from Mark's deranged intentions. The rest of the night was spent in a state of vigilance, the officer patiently comforting me while we awaited any sign of Mark. But he never showed. And as dawn broke, the officer left with a stern warning to call immediately if Mark resurfaced. Over the following weeks, I lived in constant fear, looking over my shoulder at every turn. The police were never able to apprehend Mark, and I began to doubt whether I would ever find peace. The chilling encounter had left me traumatized, a prisoner in my own home. Story 8. It was a quiet Monday evening, and I had settled into my cozy home office, physically working on my laptop. The soft glow of the desk lamp provided a warm contrast to the darkening room as the sun dipped below the horizon. My husband was away on a business trip, and I relished the solitude, finding getting work done. As I was engrossed in my tasks, the faint sound of a knock at the door barely registered. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 7 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? I rose from my desk and made my way to the front door, feeling a sense of unease. When I opened the door, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood on my doorstep. They looked to be around 10 or 11 years old. The boy spoke up, his voice shaky. "Ma'am, we're really sorry to bother you, but we're trying to get home, and we need $5 for the bus. Can you help us?" My initial suspicion waned as I looked at their earnest faces, and my heart went out to them. I rummaged through my purse and handed them a $5 bill, hoping it would help them on their way. They thanked me profusely, and then the boy hesitated before asking, "Could I use your bathroom, please? It's been a long walk." I considered their request for a moment, torn between being a good Samaritan and the instinctive caution that had always been ingrained in me. Finally, I agreed, leading them down the hall to the bathroom. As they went in, I cracked the door ajar. An hour passed, and I returned to my work, believing that I had done a good deed and that the children were now on their way home. However, as the minutes ticked by, a growing unease settled in the pit of my stomach. It shouldn't have taken them so long in the bathroom. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check on them. As I approached the bathroom, I heard faint noises from inside, shuffling sounds that made my heart race. I pushed the door open slowly, revealing a scene that sent a chill down my spine. The window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the evening breeze. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. I had been lured into a trap. Those innocent-looking children had unlocked my window, and now a man was climbing through it, his eyes filled with malice. Before I could react, the intruder was inside my home, blocking my path to the door. Fear and adrenaline coursed through me as I scrambled to find a way out. He moved closer, his intentions clear, and I knew I had to act fast. With a surge of strength, I bolted towards the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the counter, clutching it tightly as I turned to face the intruder. He advanced with a predatory smile, thinking he had the upper hand, but I wasn't going down without a fight. I swung the skillet with all my might, striking him square in the face. He let out a scream of pain and stumbled back, crashing into a chair. It bought me just enough time to make a run for it. I dashed out the back door, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the man cursing and giving chase, but adrenaline fueled my escape. I sprinted through the dimly lit backyard, my breath coming in gasps until I reached my neighbor's house. Pounding on their door, I begged for help, and they quickly called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived, and they apprehended the intruder in my backyard. As they arrested him, I watched a mixture of relief and anger coursing through me. It turned out that the children at the door were pawns in a man's sinister plot, used to gain entry into my home. The police assured me that they would be okay and that they would contact their parents. As for the man, he had a long history of criminal activity. He had several robberies to his credit, 3 of which were violent. I just got lucky that day. Story 9. I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, seeking a fresh start in life. The past few days had been filled with unpacking boxes and getting used to the unfamiliar surroundings. As I settled into my new home, the sense of isolation began to creep in. It was a peaceful neighborhood, but the unfamiliarity of it all was unsettling. One evening, as the clock ticked towards 11 p.m., I was home alone. My new house felt strange in the dim glow of the living room lamp. I was lounging on the couch, trying to unwind after a long day when the doorbell rang, shattering the silence of the night. I glanced at the clock, puzzled by the late-night visitor. Who on earth could it be at this hour? I cautiously approached the front door and peered through the peephole. On the other side stood a middle-aged man, dressed casually. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to open the door, smiling warmly, which put me slightly at ease. "Hey there, neighbor," he greeted, extending his hand for a handshake. "I live just down the street, and I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." I shook his hand and introduced myself. He seemed friendly, and I figured it was a nice gesture to meet someone in the neighborhood. We chatted about the area, and he even shared some helpful tips about living there. But as the conversation continued, something began to feel off. He started asking more personal questions about my work, my daily routines, and whether I lived alone. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. Why was he so curious about my life? I began to feel uncomfortable and tried to steer the conversation away from personal topics. However, he persisted, pressing me for information. His friendly demeanor had shifted, and he seemed increasingly fixated on prying into my life. My anxiety grew, and I made an excuse about needing to get up early the next day, hoping he would take the hint and leave. But he didn't budge. Instead, he insisted on coming inside for a cup of coffee, which I adamantly declined. As I stepped back from the doorway, I noticed his demeanor change again. His friendly smile had transformed into an unsettling grin. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, and said in a low, menacing voice, "I think I should come in." Panic surged through me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away, my heart racing. He began to pound on the door, shouting angrily, demanding to be let in. Fear coursed through my veins as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as quickly as my trembling hands would allow. The operator assured me that help was on the way, and I huddled in the corner of my living room, clutching my phone tightly. The man outside continued to bang on the door, growing increasingly agitated. He threatened to break in, his words becoming more menacing with each passing moment. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I could hear the sirens in the distance growing louder, a welcome sound that brought relief. The pounding on the door ceased as the police pulled into my driveway, and the man was apprehended. Turns out the man wasn't a neighbor at all, but a complete stranger who had been lurking in the area. His intentions were unclear, but the terror he had instilled in me that night would linger for a long time. As the police took him away, I felt a wave of gratitude for their swift response, and for my instincts that told me something wasn't right. Story 10. It was a sunny afternoon, and I found myself at home alone, enjoying the rare tranquility of an empty house. My husband was at work, and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The only sounds were the chirping birds and the distant hum of lawnmowers from the neighboring yards. I was engrossed in a book when I heard a knock on the front door. Glancing at the clock, I wondered who could be visiting at this time of day. As I approached the door, I could see a teenage boy standing on the porch through the frosted glass window. He wore a tattered t-shirt, jeans, and had a lawnmower parked on the sidewalk. I opened the door, and he greeted me with a friendly smile. "Hi, Mom," he said politely. "I noticed your lawn could use mowing. I'm trying to earn some extra money. Would you like me to take care of it for you?" I appreciated the initiative and smiled back. "Oh, thank you. I think we're okay for now. My husband usually handles the yard work." The boy nodded, his smile fading slightly, and he stepped back. "All right, no problem. If you change your mind, here's my number." He handed me a small slip of paper with his name, Kyle, and a phone number written on it. I thanked him and closed the door, returning to my book. About an hour later, there was another knock at the door. I got up and opened it, half expecting to see Kyle again. And there he was, holding his lawnmower. "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want your lawn mowed? It'll look great, I promise," he urged. I sighed, realizing that my husband wouldn't be able to get to it for a while. "Okay, Kyle, go ahead. Just make sure not to make too much noise." He grinned and got to work. I watched him from the window as he expertly maneuvered the lawnmower around the yard. He seemed diligent and hardworking, so I decided to go outside and offer him a cold drink. I approached Kyle, who had taken off his earbuds, and handed him a bottle of water. "Thanks for doing this," I said, trying to make small talk. "How long have you been doing lawn care?" He accepted the drink and took a sip before answering. "A few years now. It's a good way to make some cash." I nodded, feeling a bit more at ease. "Well, we appreciate it. Just let me know if you need anything else." Kyle continued to work, and I went back inside, relieved to have found a solution for our overgrown lawn. But as I settled back into my book, a feeling of unease began to gnaw at me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the situation didn't sit right. Eventually, I decided to check on Kyle's progress. When I stepped out onto the porch, I was puzzled to find a lawnmower abandoned in the middle of the yard, with Kyle nowhere in sight. My heart began to race, and I called out, "Kyle, are you okay?" Silence. I approached the lawnmower, my anxiety growing with every step. Then I heard it. A soft, eerie sound coming from inside the house. It was the unmistakable creaking of the staircase. My mind raced as I realized that Kyle must have entered the house without my knowledge. Panic set in, and I had to gather every ounce of courage to ascend the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity. As I reached the top of the staircase, my worst fears were realized. There was Kyle, standing in the hallway, facing the wall with his back to me. He was muttering something incoherent under his breath. "Kyle," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" He turned to face me slowly, his eyes vacant and unblinking. His clothes were smeared with dirt and grass stains, and his hands were clenched into fists. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Kyle, you need to leave right now." But instead of responding, he began to advance toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. It was as if he were in a trance, his eyes devoid of recognition. Fear surged through me, and I turned and ran down the stairs as fast as I could, my only thought being to get out of the house. I heard Kyle's heavy footsteps behind me, and I knew I had to make it to the front door before he caught up. I burst through the front door, stumbling out onto the porch, and didn't look back until I had reached the safety of the front yard. Kyle was standing in the doorway, his vacant stare fixed on me. I dialed 911, my trembling fingers struggling to press the buttons on my phone. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, and they assured me that officers were on their way. As I waited for the police to arrive, I kept a weary eye on Kyle, who hadn't moved from the doorway. His blank expression never wavered, and it sent shivers down my spine. When the police finally arrived, they detained Kyle and questioned him about his bizarre behavior. He claimed to have no memory of entering the house and appeared genuinely confused about the entire situation. I provided a statement to the police, and they assured me they would investigate further. It was clear that something was seriously wrong with Kyle, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and unease as they took him away for evaluation. In the days that followed, I learned that Kyle had a history of mental health issues. He had recently stopped taking his medication, which might have contributed to his erratic behavior. The incident was chilling, a stark reminder of how unpredictable and frightening mental illness can be. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled over me. My sense of safety in my own home had been shattered, and I knew it would take time to rebuild. My husband and I took steps to improve our home security, and I couldn't help but wonder how differently things might have ended if I had let my guard down just a bit more that day. Story 11. Living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, I relished in the solitude it provided. My evenings were quiet, spent reading or watching TV, and it had become a place where I felt safe and secure. Little did I know that one night, that sense of security would be shattered. It was a dark and stormy night, rain pouring down relentlessly. The distant rumble of thunder added to the eerie atmosphere as I curled up on the couch, engrossed in a mystery novel. The sudden sound of my doorbell ringing sent a jolt of surprise through me. Who on earth would be visiting on a night like this? Reluctantly, I got up to answer the door, peering through the peephole. A man, drenched from head to toe, stood on my doorstep. He held a dripping wet Bible in one hand and wore a disheveled, soaked suit. His appearance sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't just leave him out there in the storm. I opened the door, trying to hide my unease. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man smiled warmly, rainwater dripping from his hair. "I'm from the church," he said. "I was passing by when the storm hit, and I got caught in it. I was wondering if I could seek shelter here for a while, and maybe talk to you about our congregation." I hesitated, not entirely comfortable with the idea of inviting a stranger into my home, but his mention of the church made me feel guilty for being distrustful. Besides, it was pouring rain, and he looked miserable. "All right," I said reluctantly. "You can come in, but just for a little while." He thanked me profusely as he stepped inside. I gave him a towel to dry off and offered a seat in the living room. He began talking about the church, its mission, and its community activities. I listened politely, but his presence still made me uneasy. As the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His friendly eyes seemed too intense, and I noticed he was constantly glancing around my house. His questions grew more personal, asking if I lived alone and what my daily routines were like. I began to feel trapped, a creeping sense of dread pulsating within me. I wanted him out of my home, but I didn't want to be impolite. The storm outside continued to rage, and the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, he abruptly stood up. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said with a forced smile. "I should be going now." Relieved, I walked him to the door, my heart pounding. As he stepped back out into the rain, he turned to me and said, "You have a lovely home. I'll be back to visit soon." The words sent a chill down my spine. I quickly locked the door behind him, my mind racing. Who was that man, and why had he really come to my home on such a stormy night? The sense of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly avoided a nightmare. That night, I double-checked all the locks, windows, and security systems in my house. I couldn't shake the fear that he might return, and I wanted to be prepared. Sleep eluded me, and I spent the night on edge, wondering what his true intentions had been. The chilling encounter had left me with a haunting sense of vulnerability, and it was a long time before I felt safe in my own home again. Story 12. I had just returned from a week-long vacation with some friends, and the exhaustion was starting to set in. My small, cozy apartment had never looked so welcoming. I lugged my suitcase up the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, feeling a familiar sense of relief. The first thing I noticed was the eerie silence. It wasn't a comforting stillness I had expected, but something far more unsettling. The apartment was supposed to be empty. I lived alone, yet as I stood there in the doorway, a wave of dread washed over me. I could sense that something was horribly wrong. I cautiously moved through the dimly lit living room, my heart pounding in my chest. The television was on, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I never left it on when I was away, and I certainly didn't remember it being on when I left for vacation. As I crept further into the apartment, my ears caught a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper, a breath, something that should not have been there. Panic surged within me as I realized I was not alone. There was someone else here, lurking in the shadows of my own home. Adrenaline coursing through my veins, I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. A sudden burst of light revealed a figure standing in the corner, partially hidden behind the curtains. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the intruder. It was a man, a complete stranger, standing there in my apartment. His eyes were wild, darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. He was wearing dirty, tattered clothes, and his unkempt appearance sent shivers down my spine. "What the hell are you doing here?" I managed to stammer, my voice quivering with fear. The man didn't respond. His gaze locked onto me. He looked deranged, unstable, and I had no idea what he was capable of. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had he broken in while I was away? How did he enter my apartment? I reached for my phone in my pocket, my fingers trembling. I needed to call the police, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the intruder. I dialed 911 as discreetly as I could and whispered my situation to the operator. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving me. I could see the tension in his body, the unpredictability in his eyes. Fear and anger boiled within me as I backed away slowly, keeping the phone to my ear. Just then, the operator's voice crackled through the phone. "The police are on their way. Stay on the line with me," she said. I nodded, relief flooding me at having someone on the other end of the line. But the intruder seemed to sense that time was running out. With a sudden burst of movement, he lunged toward me, a manic expression on his face. Pure terror propelled me into action. I sidestepped his attack, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and bolted for the door. As I burst out into the hallway, I heard the intruder shouting behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I raced down the stairs, heart pounding, until I was safely outside. Within minutes, the police arrived, and they quickly apprehended the intruder. It turned out he had broken in while I was away, seeking shelter and food. He was homeless, desperate, and mentally unstable. It was a terrifying encounter, one that left me shaken to my core. Living alone had always been my preference. I cherished the solitude, the freedom to do as I pleased without anyone else's interference. It was a quiet life, but it was my life, and I relished it. Little did I know that one ordinary evening, that life would turn into a living nightmare. Story 13. In a small town with about 1,000 people, we are located in the deep countryside, and crime just doesn't happen often. apart from the odd stolen bike, etc. I suppose we are quite relaxed about home security and will often leave the door open all day in summer for the dog to walk in as he pleases, leaving the cars unlocked, and even the house sometimes, never with any problems. Maybe our naivety played a part in this story. It's important to note that my kitchen backs into a public footpath, which in summer is extremely busy with people walking their dogs. They can look straight into the many windows from the footpaths into our kitchen. With the setting explained, I'll get on with the story. I was about 16 at the time, and the story was a couple of years ago. I had taken my dog out for a walk mid-afternoon, like I did every day. I grabbed his lead, locked the door, and took him out for an hour's walk through the fields that surround my house. When I came back, I opened the door, placed the keys on the kitchen table, and went on with my day. Later on, my mother asked if I had seen the kitchen door key, and I explained that I had left it on the table. She went and looked, but it wasn't there. I then doubted myself, thinking maybe I didn't lock the door when I left and dropped it on the walk. Although I was certain I could remember leaving it on the table, I didn't think much about it, assuming it would reappear in the house. If it didn't, I thought I would find it on the walk the next day, as I always walked the same route. A couple of days went by, and the key still wasn't found. I searched the house and my walk route, but it couldn't be found. I found it rather strange, as I recalled putting it on the table, but I assumed I had imagined it, and I must have dropped it. Luckily, we had another key and went on using that key for the door instead. About 4 days after losing my keys, which didn't just have the kitchen door key, but also had the front door key, myself and my mom were disrupted from watching TV by our dog, barking like crazy in the kitchen. This was very out of character for him, as he normally barks during the day when people walk past the kitchen. My mom and I went in to find out what upset him, to find the new key had fallen out of the door and was on the floor. This was extremely strange, because we have extremely old doors, since my house is about 200 years old. The keys are very thick, old-fashioned keys, and the only way they can fall out of the door is if you push a key in from the other side, or let you pull it out. My mom and I were a little concerned at this point, but decided we were being silly, so we locked and bolted the door and went to bed. When I got to my room, I locked my bedroom door, as I quite often do to stop my parents from disrupting me in the morning. Thank God I did this night as well. In the next morning, I was awoken by my father shouting he was leaving for work and would lock the door. My mom had already left, so it was just me in. I heard him lock the door, and I tried to go back to sleep. Roughly 10 minutes later, I heard the door being unlocked and opened again, and someone came straight upstairs. I thought nothing of this and assumed my dad had forgotten something. That was until the person walked straight upstairs to my bedroom door and started rattling it forcefully, trying to get it open. I was confused and shouted hello. At this moment, I heard someone sprint from my room and down the stairs, nearly shaking the house. He ran that fast. I knew it wasn't my dad. Now, I jumped out of bed and then locked my door and ran downstairs to make sure my dog was okay. When I got to the stairs, I could see the front door was wide open. I panicked and ran outside to see if I could see anyone, but I couldn't. At this point, I started to cry when it finally occurred to me that someone must have seen my keys on the kitchen table, taken them, and tried to get into my house the night before, but was disturbed by my dog. It didn't make sense to me though, because right next to our front door was my MacBook, a 50-inch TV, and a mobile phone, all in arm's reach, but the person didn't stop at all. They just walked straight up to my room with purpose. I phoned my brother, who came storming around trying to console me. He decided he would take me out to get some food after calming me down as much as he could. When we were about to leave, We made sure all doors downstairs were locked and bolted except the front door, which cannot be bolted. My brother also went upstairs and shut every single door of the rooms upstairs. We went out and came back to find the front door unlocked again. At this point, I was so scared. If once hadn't been enough, we went inside to see again that nothing was stolen. Everything was in its place apart from the laptop and mobile which we had moved beforehand. We went upstairs to check if anything was gone, to find when we went upstairs, only one door was open, which was, you guessed it, my bedroom. Nothing I could notice was stolen. He could tell someone had looked around, but I couldn't see anything missing. My parents assumed that I must have had a stalker, which I couldn't pinpoint anyone who it could likely be. Being a teenager with red hair, my hair and looks have always given me, and still to this day get me, unwanted attention from many creepy men, which I will put this encounter down to. We changed the locks on all doors and added extra bolts. We have never had any issues since, but I am still terrified to be home alone. It terrifies me to think what the person's intentions were and how persistent he was at breaking in. I'm so glad I had locked my bedroom door that day, and the intruder wasn't able to barge in.